at the Faculty of Arts. And it's my pleasure to welcome here troublemaker, anti-Zionist, and Israeli dissident Ronnie Barkan. Welcome. We'll have a lecture on Zionism and Palestine, and he is also co-founder. Of Boycott Within, which is a movement of Israeli people who are supporting BDS. And one more information for you is that after this lecture, there is also a Kino Palestina at Altenburg, and they were actually so kind that they postponed the start of the event. Because they planned it for 6 o'clock, but now it's from 8, so you can make it also if you want. So go to Altenburg, and then there is another interesting movie.
Yes, on the 28th of still May in Lucerna, the big hall, so like 500 seats. It's free, but last time we didn't know if we would fill the whole theater, and then actually some people didn't get in. So I will see if they will put out again the system where you can reserve, or you write me or something. But 28, or you just come. 28th of May, there's going to be a documentary about 1948. It's called Birth and Catastrophe, or Creation and Catastrophe. And you will hear from Israelis, Palestinians, people who survived Nakba, who fought in Nakba during the Nakba on both sides, and from historians from also both sides, and even British. And if everything goes well, we will connect with Ilan Papa again. So hope to see you there from 7 o'clock, 28th May. Thank you.
Thank you. So nice. It's yours.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Ronnie, I'm an Israeli dissident. I'm opposed to everything the Zionist race state stands for. And most importantly, the best way to refer to that state is by referring to the Nakba, which we mark today. 76 years ago, the Zionist race state, which is exactly that, a Zionist race state, built for the purpose of racial supremacy, for one and only one type of people. That race state established itself on top of and at the expense of the indigenous people of that land. So the Nakba is usually referred to as a historical event, but it is not, it is an ongoing process. The Nakba started actually before the 15th of May, 1948, when officially the Zionist state came into being. It started a few months earlier. I mean, there were several waves, but most, the expulsion, the forced expulsion, what we call the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, started a few months before May 48, and it hasn't ended since. That is an ongoing process, therefore we refer to it as the ongoing Nakba. What is happening right now in Gaza is part of that. It's not separate from the thinking and the practice of those early Zionists who founded the Zionist state. It's just much more horrible to see, especially now that we have it all live streamed in front of our eyes. So here's a quote from the first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, one of the founders of the state, and it is self-explanatory. I support compulsory transfer. I don't see anything immoral in it. He wasn't alone in that. Ben-Gurion also didn't explicitly give orders to expel, but he implicitly worked very hard on that project. What happened in 1948 for about a year or so is that in total about 750,000 Palestinians have been expelled, about 530 villages, Palestinian villages, have been demolished or reoccupied. this is how the state of Israel came into being, with a lot of support from Czechoslovakia, by the way. You may be familiar with this set of maps. In a nutshell, it just shows you how Palestine became Israel. Okay? Don't be fooled by the two colors on the map. It was all Palestine. It is still Palestine, but now people also refer to it as Israel. Choose whichever terminology you like, but this is all the same land. One was being converted into the other, transformed into the other. I don't much like this set of maps, other than what it means, the ethnic cleansing and the expulsion and the Zionist terror that came about and hasn't stopped ever since. But the reason that I don't much like this set of maps is that it only deals with the territory of Palestine, also known as Israel. But actually, much more revealing is seeing the composition of the population on that territory, who is allowed to live on that land. That is much more telling. So later on, I'll show you another set of maps that is a little more telling. For now, I believe that most of you are already familiar with that. There used to be Palestine until 1946 or so. The leftmost map, you see that only about 10% of the land was owned in Jewish hands. I should say Zionist hands, because there is a confusion, and we will touch on that, between Zionism and Judaism. Any and all conflation between Zionism and Judaism has to be rejected in its totality, and I'll mention that later. But for that purpose, you had Zionist Jews coming in to settle the land, and until that point, they have actually purchased most of the land, and they managed to acquire about 10% of the territory of Palestine, and they were about 30%, about 1/3 of the population. The second map is what's known as the UN Partition Plan. The UN Partition Plan of 1947 gave away more than half of the land to less than half of the population, about 56% of the land to those who were about 1/3 of the population. Most of them were newcomers, colonizers, who came to take over other people's land. That was a very, very unfair decision by the UN. There's also stories about how that UN resolution passed. It wasn't all legit. We'll put that aside. But that plan by the UN also was never materialized, never ever came into being. People to this day refer to the UN Partition Plan as if Israel has some right to exist in this or that composition, when actually they don't know that the UN Partition Plan was never implemented. Why? Because what that partition plan suggested is that the Palestinians will be in the green area, which was less than half of the area, and the others, meaning the Jews / Zionists who were living there, along with the people who were already there, the Palestinians who were already there, will share the white territory. But that goes against everything the Zionists were about. So, if we look at this map, this is the amount of people that were supposed to share that white space. In the green area, you had about 700,000 Palestinians for that Palestinian state, in less than half of Palestine. In the white area, there was supposed to be the quote-unquote Jewish state, which has nothing to do with Judaism and everything to do with Zionism, where 600,000 Zionists were supposed to share the land with another 500,000 Palestinians. That also counts the Jerusalemites, the East Jerusalemites. And that plus sign, the 600,000 plus 500,000, would never have been accepted by any single Zionist, not one, because that goes against everything that Zionism is about. Zionism is all about creating a state for one and only one type of people, and the only part, the exclusivity aspect of it, is inherent to Zionism, definitely inherent to the Zionist project as it was implemented in Palestine. Some people may say that some Zionists were willing to share the land, maybe. In 1948, it all collapsed into one version of reality. You know, like in physics, you have the wave function where you have a superposition of states, and then you may have all kinds of possibilities, but in 1948, it all collapsed into one and only one type of solution. And this map was never ever implemented. The Zionists, they agreed to this plan on paper. The Palestinians rejected the plan. Obviously, why would they accept it? Getting less than half of the land and giving more than half of the land to those who just came to take over their land, obviously they wouldn't accept it. That's a no-brainer. But the Zionists accepted it on paper, but never ever meant to implement it. What they had in mind was something very different. So here is that other set of maps that I was talking about. This is what actually happened. You can see that historically it was all Palestinian owned, and below the map you see how the population, green for Palestinians, white for Zionists, and below you see also the acquisition of land, how much land was in their possession, again green and white. So initially all Palestinian, both land and population. And then at the eve of the establishment of the State of Israel, you see, as we mentioned, you have, it doesn't matter exactly the numbers, I don't know if you can see the numbers, but it's not that important. And you can see that about 1/3 of the population were Zionists, and 2/3 were Palestinian, and this is how much land they had. And then the partition plan, which offered more land to those who were less than half of the population. But actually, the next map, the War of 48, also known by Israelis as the War of Independence, independence to some, submission, subjugation, exile for others. What happened then is something already quite different. You see that there's more of the white, you see that far less of the land was in Palestinian hands, because what happened in practice is that the Zionists took over actually in that war more of the land, more than what they were allocated in the UN partition plan. And this is what led to the creation of those green islands, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip has an interesting shape here, and it is telling because it was carved out in that shape in order to house those who were ethnically cleansed in that war. In 1948, the Zionists, after a whole year of deliberation about how they're going to achieve that, they planned and then executed that ethnic cleansing of the land. So after 1 year of deliberation, on the 10th of March 1948, they published Plan Dalet, Plan B of the Haganah, which basically details how we are going to take over the land, how we are going to drive away the people from that land, and it includes engulfing, surrounding the village, Palestinian villages from 3 directions, leaving only one direction for them to flee to. It includes all kinds of war crimes like killing people and so on, burning down the houses. All of that is put in detail about how this should carry on. Basically, there's 2 versions of that plan, but the more detailed one is very detailed. And the Gaza Strip, that green area, basically is where the people from the southern part, the Nakab, the southern part of Palestine, and all the way to the north to Jaffa, which is one of the oldest cities in the world. People arrived into Gaza as refugees, and this was established as a refugee camp. To this day, the vast majority of the residents of Gaza, over 70% of them, are refugees, yearning to go back home. Most of them just across the fence. Their original homes are just across the fence. There's no border between Gaza and the rest of Palestine, just like there was no border between the Warsaw Ghetto and Poland or the rest of Warsaw. There's a fence, a highly militarized fence, with the best technology, with the most advanced means of control and domination over population. And we will talk a little bit about that. Now, afterwards, the green areas were conquered by the Zionists in 1967. That's this map, the second to the right. That's the second from the right. All of a sudden, you see that the numbers here of population change, and basically this led to some problem for the Zionists because all of a sudden they had too many Palestinians again in their hands. So basically they implemented a military rule there, which exists to this day. Acquiring land was something that the Zionists wanted. The problem was that they acquired the land along with the population of that land, which again goes against the Zionist idea of creating a place for us and only for us. So they had to come up with all kinds of creative ideas how to manage the situation, how to manage the population there. And to this day, people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are under a harsh, brutal military occupation. This is the longest running military occupation in history. And the situation in Gaza was beyond description. Now it's beyond anything that anyone can imagine. So that's kind of how things came into being. Why did the Zionists want to create a place for them and only for them? Let's talk a little bit about Zionism. Zionism came about in Europe late 19th century, mostly in the head of some guy in Vienna, Herzl, and his friends. And they were not religious Jews, they were anti-religious, they were deeply anti-Jewish. They regarded the religious Jews around them in the greatest contempt, in the most racist way. They said that they were backwards, that they were carrying disease, that they were like rats. These are direct quotes. And they didn't want to be like them. They wanted to be like the rest of the Europeans around them. The problem for them is that even though they really wanted to be like the rest of the society rejected them. Because there was real anti-Semitism around. So, while other people, like the Bundists, the Bund, which were a Jewish socialist movement in Eastern Europe, while they acknowledged that yes, there is racism around us and we have to fight it, just like we fight any other form of racism, the Zionists basically fully adopted the anti-Semitic discourse. The anti-Semites said that the Jews had no place in that land, and the Zionists fully adopted that. They said, oh, we are different, we are looked at differently, we must be different, we must be special, and we cannot live among the rest of the society. Therefore, we need to have a safe space for us and only for us. The only problem is that in 1948 they established their so-quote-unquote safe space in a land that was already occupied by others. But in order to establish this so-called safe space, they needed to make sure that there's only the people of their type and not the others. Therefore, the Zionists had to reject the UN partition plan. They could never ever afford to accept sharing that land because that goes against everything that Zionism is about. What was established in practice is something like this: a multi-layered system of control, where you have different aspects of control, domination, and terror implemented in different territories, and also based on one's ethnicity. So, basically, the left side is a direct quote from the UN report on apartheid, an excellent report by Professors Tilly and Falk. And the right side is an infographic by Visualizing Palestine, which are producing great infographics. And they're pretty much showing the same thing. So you have the multi-layered system, where people like myself are among the privileged group at the top. We have basically all the rights, and this was all built in order to allow rights for that group of people. And then you have all kinds of lesser and lesser rights and freedoms. So you have those who are second-class citizens of Israel. Zionists would tell you that they are equal citizens. Far from it. Not only that they're not equal citizens, there's no notion of equality in Israel. The Zionist race state is built on the exact opposite of democratic values like equality, rights of minorities, and multiculturalism. It is built for one and only one type of people, and I can say that over and over again. So those who are second-class citizens, they are citizens of the state, but they're not equal citizens. And there's many ways to show that. They can vote, but their vote means very little. Actually, you cannot even run for elections in Israel if you demand to democratize the place. Basic law of the Knesset, Article 7a, if I'm not mistaken, says that one cannot even run for elections. A party cannot run for elections if its platform, or an individual cannot run for elections if they express themselves in a way that negates Israel as a quote-unquote Jewish and democratic state. Only that Jewish and democratic state is a euphemism for Zionist and apartheid. So you have to understand the lingo to understand what it means when they say Jewish and democratic. Democratic, okay, we can understand what democratic is, but when they claim Jewish and democratic, what they mean is actually a supremacist state for one and only one type of people that pretends to be a democracy. So whenever you see Jewish and democratic, just replace that with Zionist and apartheid. Whenever you see Jewish, replace that with Zionist. Whenever they say Israeli democracy, replace that with the Israeli apartheid. It'll make much more sense to you. And then you have the third on the map is the East Jerusalemites, which are regarded as permanent residents, only that they are far from being permanent. They have been occupied in 1967 when Israel took over the West Bank and Gaza. But Israel really wanted that territory, which is East Jerusalem. They wanted the greater Jerusalem. So they had to create a new category in the law, which is these permanent residents. Because they wanted the land, and they gave some, the other part of the West Bank was kept under military control. But that part, they took as part of Greater Jerusalem, only that, again, there were people there. What do you do with the people? You create some category for them. So these so-called permanent residents of East Jerusalem, they are living in a very impermanent state, in a very precarious state, where, for example, if someone from East Jerusalem, who may have been living there for generations, they and their family have been living there for generations, if they will come to study here in Prague, and they won't go back to visit for a few years, they can lose the right to ever go back home. If they marry someone in Ramallah, which is 15 minutes away, which is just the rest of the West Bank, their spouse may not be able to come and live with them in East Jerusalem, so they will have to move to Ramallah. And if they stay there for too long, then they may be able to see their house from Ramallah, but they will not be able to go there anymore. That's the situation. And Israel is especially cracking down on East Jerusalem. I'm sure you're familiar with Sheikh Jarrah, for example. Sheikh Jarrah, I never know how to pronounce it. You may be familiar with that. There's different neighborhoods of East Jerusalem that are being ethnically cleansed as we speak, and for many, many decades. And this is all part of the same thinking of the creation of the State of Israel. It is not separate from that. It is not that, all of a sudden there's some crackdown against the residents of Sheikh Jarrah. No, it's just the next step in the chain. And specifically in East Jerusalem, you see in the West Bank you have military control. So you have the military and the Shin Bet, the Secret Security Service, like the Israeli Stasi. They are the ones who are operating there. In East Jerusalem, you have all elements of the state. The military, the Shin Bet, the municipality, the courts, the police, everyone is acting against the residents of East Jerusalem. What happens is that the Shin Bet gives a blacklist to the municipality in Jerusalem, and the municipality hands out fines to the people there to make their life miserable, to make them miserable, and to basically force them out in one way or another. What happens, for example, okay, there's many examples, doesn't matter. There's a crackdown against these Jerusalemites. Then you have the West Bank and Gaza, which are the green areas, which have been under harsh military control. There's no freedom of movement, there's no freedom of expression, and mostly also no freedom or no right to life. In the West Bank, for example, people get arrested as a matter of policy. Israel is holding thousands of Palestinian hostages in Israeli prisons, political prisoners. Anyone who dares to speak up, anyone who dares to oppose the Israeli regime, even if they just go to demonstrate with a loudspeaker, with a megaphone, they can get arrested very easily based on military law. And the military courts, where they will be tried, have a 99.7% conviction rate. So it would practically take a miracle for a Palestinian not to be convicted in such a court. The situation in Gaza is beyond description. The way it was before, the 7th of October, is that at least 95% of the water was toxic. It was not fit for human consumption. Israel controls every aspect of Gaza, by land, sea, air. They went as far in their control as drafting formulas to count the caloric intake for the people of Gaza. And they came up with some number, 2,200 and some calories. And this was actually submitted to the Israeli court, so we know that for a fact. And they made amendments to the formulas, saying people in Gaza don't need so much fresh fruit and vegetables, they need more white flour and sugar and oil. Now they say that they never implemented it. Okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. That type of thinking about counting the caloric intake for the people in that concentration camp of Gaza is a Nazi type of thinking, whether they implemented it or not. And they have implemented possibly even worse policies than what I just told you a moment ago. I mentioned that Gaza has been transformed into a concentration camp, and what we are seeing these days is that the same Gaza is being transformed into an extermination camp. Finally, and most importantly, is the last part, the bottom part, all the refugees. All those refugees, which are to this day, 7 decades later, denied the right to come back home, to go back home. They are the most important aspect of this whole equation, of this whole story. They are the ones, first of all, who even by numbers are the most important. They are more than 50% of all Palestinians who are in forced exile to this day. They are the ones who have suffered the longest since the very creation of the State of Israel, and every time Israel expels and drives away more and more people from their land. And besides, they're also the most important because there will be no resolution, there will be no way to resolve the issue, the situation. It's not a conflict, never was a conflict. There will be no way to resolve that issue without justice and without equal rights for all the sons and daughters of that land. And that is first and foremost by implementing the right of return for any Palestinian who wishes to go back to their home. So, you may say that, yeah, but what about the Israeli leftists and so on? So there is no Israeli left, never existed. There are some leftists, I know them all by name. There's about 400, 500 of us, all anti-Zionist. And of course the Palestinians living there as second-class citizens. But those so-called leftists, those so-called liberal Zionists are actually potentially far worse than the right wing, those who are racist and proud of it, the acting government, Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and all the rest. This guy, for example, you may be familiar with him, Benny Gantz. He was running against Netanyahu. He was running to counter, like basically, to offer the alternative, the more liberal, moderate, whatever you want to call it, centrist, they call it these days, alternative. In his election campaign, he was the military chief of staff. And in his election campaign, this is what it looked like. The very first video in his campaign, did I write the date for that? I don't know the date, but it was some years ago. This is what it looked like. 2014. 2014 in Gaza, Operation Protective Edge. The numbers running on the screen are the numbers of the so-called terrorists that he is responsible for killing. (1,364 terrorists dead, 3.5 years of silence, only the strong wins. Gantz, Israel before everything else. Okay? I can show you other quote-unquote liberal Zionists and their version of liberalism and leftism, if you want. You're familiar with this guy. Gallant, Yoav Gallant. He's the one who, not too long ago, said we will deny Gazans from food, electricity, water. There was another thing. Fuel? Yeah. Human animals, exactly. He was the defense minister. He was also, believe it or not, the minister of education at some point. This is what he says in a great video, in a great film called The Lab, about how Israel uses the Gaza concentration camp as its laboratory to try out its weapons. And then they sell it to the rest of the world as being battle tested, field tested. This is what he had to say, and it is in the film, The Lab.
היחס בין מספר הנפגעים של צה"ל לבין מספר הנפגעים של האויב היה, הייתי אומר, אחד הסממנים המרכזיים והדברים שהדריכו אותי בכל התכנון של התהליך הזה. כשהדבר הזה מסתיים ביחס שהוא קרוב ל-100 לאחד, קרי 10 חיילים ביתר בנינו שנפגעו במבצע הזה, אבל 800 מחבלים, 80 לאחד. הדבר הזה מסביר לצד השני שאנחנו יודעים לעשות משהו שהוא לא יודע לעמוד בו, ולא אנחנו לא יודעים לעמוד. זה הדבר הראשון. הדבר השני, אנחנו הגענו כאן למצב שעל 800 מחבלים נהרגו לצערנו כ-300 אזרחים. כלומר, היחס הוא בערך שליש לאחד. כלומר, הוא בין פי 10 בין פי 30 יותר טוב מאשר בכל פעולה מבצעית מערבית שנעשתה בעשרות השנים האחרונות. באותו זמן שמדינות מסוימות באירופה או באסיה קינו אותם על כך שפגענו באזרחים, הם שלחו את המפקדים שלהם, את הגנרלים שלהם אלינו. אני תדרכתי כאן במקום הזה ובמקומות אחרים מפקדי צבאות מ10 מדינות על מנת להבין איך הגענו לפלא הזה של יחס כל כך נמוך של נפגעים. כלומר, הצביעות היא גדולה, מצד אחד מגנים אותך באופן מדיני כלפי חוץ, מצד שני שואלים מה הפטנט הזה שהמצאתם אתם הישראלים שאתם מסוגלים להמיר גם לכסף.
Okay, so he plays the number game. He also doesn't count well between terrorists and civilians. He obviously doesn't count the Israeli side as terrorists. But the idea of turning blood into money, your trick, Israelis, of turning blood into money, they have managed to perfect that. They've really managed to magically turn blood into money and turn the whole operation there. Second. I thought we were in full screen until now. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. was Nakba Day 2 years ago. Exactly 2 years ago today. Myself and a bunch of activists with Palestine Action, what we call actionists, went to smash up the Elbit Systems headquarters in Bristol, UK. Elbit is Israel's largest arms manufacturer, producing 85% of the weapons that are being used by Israel. It is also producing about 85% of the drones, the UAVs that are being used, that are hovering 24/7 over Gaza, instilling terror on the people of Gaza, even when they don't bomb these people who have no safe place to go to. Just the fact that they're hovering all the time, especially the drone that's being used the most, the Hermes 450, it is making so much noise that the Israelis refer to that drone as being the horror of the people of Gaza, because its very noise is creating trauma among the people. I mentioned yesterday that people, Israelis who live not far away from Gaza, on the other side of the fence, their children sometimes have post-traumatic PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because they hear the bombing. Sometimes also Palestinians manage to fly a few rockets back. And the children there have PTSD. In Gaza, there's no PTSD because there's no post-trauma. It's a constant trauma. And that's how people have to survive. Sorry. Let's see. Try again. Elbit Systems, a wonderful company. Elbit Systems that produces all these weapons. It produces everything from ammunition, rifles, to drones and parts of tanks and all kinds of sophisticated electro-optics and you name it. It is producing these UAVs, these drones, the big ones that are hovering 24/7, that control every aspect of what's happening in Gaza. The Israeli Air Force commander said that they have tiled the airspace of Gaza, that there's no point that they cannot see and cannot control and cannot bomb 24/7. They're also producing other types of autonomous vehicles, not only these autonomous drones. By the way, there's also suicide drones if you want. There's all kinds of classifications. A suicide drone, you just send it flies like a missile, hovers like a drone, then goes down like a missile. You just tell it, I want roughly this or that type of target, it'll find it, it'll destroy it. Or as the developers said, it'll find something to blow itself on. I can show you that video if you want. So they are producing all kinds of autonomous vehicles, land vehicles with all these weaponry that they can shoot anyone who dares to get near the fence of Gaza. They're producing autonomous boats with their weaponry. Obviously, these air vehicles, these drones of different types, they have all kinds of different names. There's that also, which is an interesting one. I want to show you that. Yeah, so let's just watch it. This one is called the Lanius. Lanius, I think, is some ancient name. Maybe someone can Google it now. I think it comes from like something like an Avenger or something like that. Anyway, nothing nice about it. But that's what it that's how they promote their wonderful Lanius, which comes on a mothership where you have a few of them, and then they do their thing autonomously. Sorry, did it again.
Ronnie, it means butcher
Butcher.
in German.
Okay. Good to know. Sorry about that. Let's try again.
Trying this out.
Yeah. So if there's any Zionists in the audience, this is the time to wave your flags. Again, Elbit, field tested on Palestinians. This is yet another infographic by Visualizing Palestine. I warmly recommend checking out their website. Using the material, it's all open source, all Creative Commons. The Hermes 900 is what's regarded as the flagship UAV drone by Elbit. It has been introduced during the quote-unquote war of 2014, also known as Protective Edge. It was regarded as a premature drone, not yet fit for the market. So Elbit personnel were there on the ground, making every takeoff and every landing throughout the 51-day assault on Gaza and for a whole year afterwards. During those 51 days, Elbit and the IDF slaughtered 551 children, liquidated 89 entire families, just obliterated them. And basically, Elbit were flying, making the takeoff and landing, while next to them, the Israeli drone pilots were dropping the bombs. You may be familiar with the story of the Butter Boys, the 4 boys on the beach who were slaughtered basically the second day of the operation. Again, there were 2 Elbit drones in that case, the Hermes 450, the one that makes a lot of noise, and the Hermes 900, the one that was flown by Elbit personnel on the ground. I know this because I read the military investigation into this, and the only reason that there was even a military investigation into the murder of the 4 boys is because there happened to be a French journalist who took a short video, and that obviously got a lot of attention. 4 boys arrived on the beach. They arrived in this compound that they were regarded as targets simply because they entered a certain perimeter. That's it. There's a word for it in Hebrew, I don't know how to translate it, but they were immediately regarded as valid targets just because they entered a certain perimeter. 1 missile was shot at them, 1 child was killed, the others fled for their lives, and within 30 seconds they were hunted down, and a second missile was shot at them. In total, 4 children were killed and 4 were injured. What else?
9 and 10 years old.
Yes,
9.
9 and 10 years old.
11.
I'm sorry that I don't remember their names. I used to, but I don't. But they're all from the Bakr family. Those who survived, you may want to look it up. One of the survivors from the Bakr family, when I mentioned that there's no post-trauma, oh my God, you can see the situation of the trauma on this child. It's nothing you would wish any child or adult. In 2018, 4 years later, Elbit cooperated with the IDF. Of course, they cooperate all the time. By the way, it's pretty much the same people operating. I mean, they leave the army, they go to Elbit. It's like they know each other, they work with each other all the time. And they are the greatest supplier of arms to Israel, to the Israeli army, and to other despotic regimes around the world. In 2018, the Israeli army wanted Elbit to do something. There was, you may be familiar with the March of Return, the Gaza March of Return. Basically, it was a mass movement of Palestinians in the Gaza concentration camp who demanded to go back home. They demanded also the end of the siege, the criminal barbaric siege of Gaza, which was deemed illegal, but also their right to return home, hence the name, the March of Return. I make it clear because some organizations try to portray it, portray it as a demonstration against the siege. It was not. It was about their right to return home just across the fence. For daring to do that in a non-violent way, people unarmed demonstrators were slaughtered, were basically targeted by snipers, including medics, including people on wheelchairs, including children. There's all these videos where actually these snipers are shooting and they're rejoicing. They're so happy about it, and they're documenting it, of course, because why not? But this was kind of not the best PR campaign for Israel, so the Israeli army approached Elbit because they wanted a solution to basically cover the whole area with tear gas. And so they took their quadcopters, these like the Lanyards, only bigger ones, these quadcopters, and they retrofitted them with grenade launchers, so they can shoot a massive amount of tear gas on the people just over their heads with these quadcopters flying above. They also retrofitted them not only with grenade launchers, also with machine guns, because why not? And also with warheads. So basically you could have a quadcopter flying above a target, dropping the warhead, and then flying back to base. At that time, they used tear gas. Now, during the genocide, they used the very same equipment to launch live grenades through windows. They use the same equipment to shoot live ammunition at people. If you may have heard that they are also luring people with sounds of crying children, and when people come out of wherever they're hiding or seeking shelter, they are being slaughtered. They're being shot at with these machine guns, which are very, very precise, by the way, because it's all automated. That's what Elbit does. And that's why we went to stop the operation in the UK. Needless to say, but I'll mention it, the UK operation is just the UK side, the UK branch of the Israeli company. The profits go to the Israeli company. It's the same know-how, it's the same tools, it's the same everything, it's the same directors. You have the same people who are heading Elbit Israel who are running the show and are leading the directors of all these different subsidiaries in the UK, and I hear that in the near future also in the Czech Republic. Here's some more. So we mentioned.
Who owns Elbit?
It's a privately owned company. The main shareholder is Federman, Mickey Federman, if I'm not mistaken. It's one of the rich, let's call them oligarchs, the rich families in Israel. But you also have all kinds of companies that are like, insurance, Israeli insurance companies, some of which I pay insurance to, have shares, quite a bit of shares in Elbit. And so can you.
Is it a state company?
No, it is not state-run. It is not state-owned, it is a privately owned company. IAI, Israeli Aerospace Industries, which is a rival to Elbit in a way, is state-owned.
So it's full private. It's full private.
Elbit is private, yes. This is some more stuff that Elbit is doing. Again, it's a visualizing Palestine, infographics, about parts for the Merkava tank, the bullets themselves that are being produced. Also, you may be familiar with the rubber-coated steel bullets, which are not rubber bullets. They are steel bullets covered in some rubber shield. I was shot at with some of those during non-violent demonstrations in the West Bank. A friend of mine was shot in the head. Luckily, he survived, but the bullet penetrated his skull. There's a video of that I can show you later. All of those are produced by Elbit, including the adapters that they fit on the rifles to use these rubber-coated bullets. Just as an example, they produce so much stuff that the list is too long to cover. They also produce surveillance equipment that is being used in this annexation wall, which was already deemed illegal in 2004. The ICJ in 2004, if I'm not mistaken, it was July 2004, they regarded it as illegal and has to be dismantled. The wall, they regarded the entire West Bank and Gaza Strip as occupied Palestinian territories, and all the settlements there are deemed illegal under international law. Nothing happened since, but this was a very clear decision, unanimous decision, I might say, by the ICJ. There was one voice that was questioning something, but even that voice, we can regard it as a unanimous decision. I was asked to talk about Jewish nationalism. So actually my answer was, do you want to talk about Jewish nationalism? There isn't such a thing. There's no Jewish nationalism. There is no nationalism in Judaism, sorry. The Zionists created something that doesn't exist in Judaism, which is everything that we are fighting against. They created something that is totally alien to Judaism and goes against, flies in the face of Judaism, which is what they refer to as Jewish nationalism, Jewish, ethnicity, all kinds of things like that. So here is a little table that I made in order to compare Zionism versus Judaism, and they have precisely nothing in common. Judaism is easy. That's a religion of thousands of years. It is theocratic. It is about God and the worshipping of God. It is a religion, as I mentioned. The state has no role, and there is no nationalism. If the state has any role, according to Judaism, it is in order to allow for the religious practice. That is the only role of the state. It is inclusive, surprising, but it is inclusive. Anyone may convert. It's not a missionary religion, so it doesn't try to convert other people. It makes it difficult to convert. But if any of you wanted to convert to Judaism, not recommended, but it's possible, you may do so. It'll take a while. Once that process is over, you will become a full-fledged member of the Jewish people. And again, the Jewish people has nothing to do with nationalism. It has everything to do with religion, like Ummah in Arabic, in Islam. And finally, what makes those people, what's common among all of them? The religious practice, of course. Adhering to the 613 mitzvot, the commands or whatever it's called in Hebrew.
Yes, it's a very good example. You mentioned the Ummah, because political Islam, one thing the nationalists or nation states don't like about political Islam as a movement is that it is absolutely anti-nationalism, because the goal of it is to spread and not to be contained, and you can't achieve that goal if you're nationalistic, right? So there are so many parallels within this, except that Judaism or Zionism has taken it one step further and weaponized Judaism, right? Yeah, thank you.
Exactly. And then you have Zionism, and the parallel to Zionism in Islam is ISIS.
Yeah.
The parallel in Christianity is the KKK. They all claim, the KKK claims for Christianity, just like ISIS claims for Islam, just like Zionism claims for Judaism. Zionism claims they are not religious, I mentioned. At the time, by the way, I didn't mention that Herzl, in his early days, before he wanted to establish a place for them and only for them, he said, we are being treated differently, right? We are being treated as Jews. We don't like that. We want to be like the rest of the Europeans. Let us all go together to the cathedral on a Sunday when the bells are ringing and mass convert into Christianity, and problem solved according to him. Only that he wrote it down. Don't believe me, look it up. But basically, obviously, he did manage to convince many of his fellow Zionists with that. But anyway, they were not religious. But they were still regarding themselves as Jewish. How so? So they had to create something. They had to come up with this idea of Jewish ethnicity, Jewish nationalism, Jewish whatever you want to call it, other than religion. However, Judaism is only a religion and nothing else. It is fundamentally based on nationalism and ultranationalism, not about religion. It is ethnocentric, it's not theocentric. If religion has any role in Zionism, it is in order to serve the state, not the other way around, as is in Judaism. Yeshayahu Leibovich, the greatest thinker in Israel, no longer with us, he was an Orthodox Jew. He was an amazing thinker, multiple PhDs, wrote about everything from science to philosophy, religion, politics. He coined the term Judeo-Nazis, and I'll explain if you want why he coined that term. He said, as a religious Jew living in Israel, when he was offered by Ben-Gurion that person who was responsible for the Nakba, when he was offered to join the government or to run for elections, he conditioned it on two things: direct elections for prime minister, and most importantly, separation of state and religion. As a religious Jew, that was crucial for him. And that separation of state and religion was something that Ben-Gurion would never have. And he told him, I want the state of Israel to keep the religion in its hands. And he, in response, said, and I want the religion of Israel to be released from your hold. Even the name Israel was stolen from Judaism by Zionism. Everything was stolen by Zionism. Yes, please.
Can I ask a question? How about those Messianic ultra-Orthodox members, for instance, of this Netanyahu government, or
Yeah.
the settlers,
Yeah.
who are at the same time strongly religious? In fact, they hate the state. They want the state to serve their
Yeah.
purposes, but at the same time they are highly religious,
Yes.
and they think that they are elected. So how do they fit in this?
So, a very good question. In Zionism took hold among only secular Jews. Again, what is a secular Jew? It doesn't make any sense. What's a secular Christian? Either you're a Christian or not Christian. Either you're Jewish or not Jewish. What does it mean, secular Jew? Okay. But this is how they refer to themselves, okay? It took hold among secular Jews. None of the religious Jews of Europe at the time supported Zionism. It was not a success story for Zionism. It wasn't popular. Only about 5% of European Jews supported Zionism. More supported the Bundists that I mentioned before, the socialist Jews who saw racism and they said, yes, we have to fight racism. They didn't think that they have to found another country in another place. So at the time, it was only among non-religious Jews. With World War II, more or less, things changed. Because of the change of circumstances, because people sought refuge, the religious Jews basically agreed to partly take part in the Zionist project. What I would say sold their souls to Zionism, while others remained to this day staunch anti-Zionists. I am anti-Zionist in every bone because I'm a humanist. They are anti-Zionist because they are Jewish. Those who are to this day staunch anti-Zionists. Today you have a whole mixture of religious Jews. Some of them remained staunch anti-Zionists. Some of them became full-on Zionists. I would question their Judaism if they are Zionist, but whatever. And you have many in the middle, because Zionism is alien to their way of life. These people, you have many of them in Israel, they are fighting against forced conscription. And the state insists on forcefully conscripting them into the army. Why do they want them in the army? Do they need more soldiers? No, they don't. They actually need less. But this is one way to drive them away from Judaism into Zionism. And these people, who are not necessarily anti-Zionist, and they are not necessarily pro-Palestinian, are fighting back against the state and standing in lines to go to military prison instead of going into the army. Because Zionism is so alien to their way of life. Because they live a different way of life, and Zionism is very different to that. So you have a whole mixture of things these days. Those who refuse to have any cooperation with the state whatsoever, to the extreme, by the way, I can give some really extreme cases how they refuse to cooperate with the state, to those who are fully part of the state, and they're also in the Netanyahu government, for example. I would question their Judaism, but who am I to say that? I don't even regard myself as Jewish. The only thing is that the state regards me as Jewish. My legal status, and that's important, my legal status as one among the privileged group is that I am a privileged Israeli Jew. I don't consider myself Israeli or Jewish. I couldn't care less about these things. But my legal status is that I have an Israeli citizenship and a Jewish nationality. And that is exactly what the apartheid system that was established in 1948 is all about, to give privileges to people of my legal status, Israeli citizenship, Jewish nationality, and deny the rights from all the others. including those who are Israeli citizens but having other nationalities. Because believe it or not, there are other nationalities for other Israeli citizens who are among the second class. You can be Druze, you can be Arab, you can be Circassian. There's one thing you cannot be, an Israeli national. There's no such thing as Israeli nationality. And this is done on purpose. Some people who have nationality equals Jewish in their identity card took that to the Supreme Court of Israel, which is the main vehicle of apartheid. And the Supreme Court, after a long deliberation, they decided that Israel cannot acknowledge having an Israeli nationality because that would undermine the very character of the State of Israel. And that is absolutely true. Because if you had an Israeli nationality in Israel, it would mean that there would be some basis for equality. Something that at least among the citizens of that state, those who haven't been ethnically cleansed, among the citizens of that state, there would be some basis for equality. But that goes against everything that Zionism is about. Not only that, the most important laws are the ones that are based on this very distinction, including the very first law, which is the one that everything is dependent on, which is the law of return. The law of return, the very first law that was legislated in Israel, first of all, comes to counter the right of return of the Palestinians. The law of return says that if you happen to be born to a Jewish family anywhere in the world and you have no connection to Israel whatsoever, you can go there and get immediate citizenship. Actually, in the law, every Jew around the world, and there's no clear definition for that, so I'm not even going to try to define it, but whatever that means, any Jew around the world is regarded by law, by Israeli law, as a citizen of the state who hasn't implemented their citizenship. They're potential citizens. And there are things like custodians of the land, and those custodians of the land, like the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, are about maintaining the land Jewish for perpetuity. And what are they custodians for? Custodians for all world Jewry. This is how they define themselves. It's totally mental. Now, the differences between Zionism and Judaism, I'll just mention the last part of this table. Okay, we said what's common among Jews? Religious practice, easy. What's common among Zionists? They came from different countries, they spoke different languages, they ate different foods, they wore different clothes. There was absolutely nothing in common among them, nothing. They didn't even speak the same language. So the Zionists were actually quite smart, and they decided to revive the Hebrew language, to create something that they can build around, to at least speak the same language. And then they created all kinds of different myths to say how we are all united by all kinds of different stories that have no basis in reality. So they revived the Hebrew language, which was a dormant language. It was only used for the Bible until that point, like Latin for the New Testament, Hebrew for the Old Testament. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we can maybe...
Questions?
Yeah, we can have some questions for now. Yeah, let's go back here.
Can I have one about Zionists, how they behaved during the Holocaust? What was their priority?
So, the Zionists claim that Israel is a safe haven for Jews. Not so. First of all, during the rise of the Third Reich and during the Holocaust and after, also when people were in dire need to find a safe haven, those who barely survived the Holocaust, they found it almost impossible to find a safe haven other than going to Palestine. The Zionists said quite clearly, the quote is, "To Palestine or to hell." This is how they treated the way that those Jews who were seeking refuge should be treated. Another quote is when Ben-Gurion said, "If I could save 1 million German Jewish children and have them scattered around the world, or save half of them and have them arrive in Palestine, I choose the latter. The Zionists actively worked to block, for example, a boat of Jewish children from reaching the shores of North America.